Hello and welcome back to another document deep dive. This time we're looking at an actual battle, which I haven't done that much before. And it's a battle that I think has been largely forgotten by everybody. Because it wasn't a big battle, it was more like a skirmish. In fact, this kind of fits into the previous video where I talked about trench warfare and kind of a stalemate on the Eastern Front. Now, this took place starting on the 21st of November 1942, and it took place in this sector that we see here, which was held by the 122nd Infantry Division, the German one. This division famously later took part in the Battle of Tali-Ihantala, I think, so they were sent to the Finnish front. But this was obviously way before that. Now, what we see here is an overview over their position at this time. And this might look a bit confusing because this is on the Eastern Front, but they're actually facing west. So this part here, this is where the Russians are coming from, so to speak, or holding. And this arch here, this is their front line of the, down here, of the 122nd Infantry Division. This is in the Rzhev salient, which is why they're facing west. This salient was almost surrounded, and they had to fight in all different directions, and they were, as you can see here, at the northwestern corner, kind of in a fairly exposed position. And what you can see here are the different sectors that they held. For example, we have the 411th Infantry Regiment that mostly held this sector here until here, and this is the divisional sector over here to a different infantry division where Lichkovo is. And yeah, so here you can see the different units, and the sector I find most interesting here is this one, because as you can already see, this is extremely weird. So we have the front going here, and then suddenly jutting forward, like a finger or something, and then going back. So they basically had a big outpost in this village here, which is the village of Pustynja or Pustynja. This was their forward outpost where they had several units, and it was quite heavily fortified. And then the front goes back to a more reasonable line here. So quite an interesting position, and you can see this is from the time frame of 18th to the 21st of November. So what was the weather like at this point? Now this is the weather report in the war diary from the 21st. 0 degrees Celsius and medium sight or line of sight, and snow was falling. So yeah, it was in fairly late November and on the Eastern Front, so yes, there already was quite a bit of snow probably on the ground and also falling on the day we are talking about. Now, anybody who watched my previous video might have an idea of how this frontline area looked like. This was also quite swampy, so many of the trenches might also have been built above ground, like in that area in the north. That said, this you can see here. Over here they drew the front line as one continuous line, whereas here the front seems to have been a lot less developed and a lot more fluid still. And probably they were organized into company strength strong points here. Including in the area that we are going to look at for the battle at Pustynja. Now, what I like to do is also try to find this area on modern satellite maps. Now, the problem here is that, and I had the same problem, by the way, when looking or when doing Operation Mars for Forgotten 2, which plays actually 5 days after this, or 4 days actually, and it's in a similar area, which is that many of these villages are basically gone today. However, I was able to find this area quite easily. So you can see up here we have Samoshka, and if we look here, this is Samoshka, and as you can see, it is gone today. Although here you can still see kind of the outline of human habitation. But if we go on this map down up here, here's Samoshka. If we go down here this road, we should come to Sabrudno. Yeah, it's also on here. Yeah, we should be able to get down to Sabrudno, which is also completely gone. But it used to be here. So here you can't see anything because it's covered by forest. One thing that this should tell you about the area is that there's basically a a difference, strong difference between a forested area and a swampy area, and you can see that on this zoomed in map here as well. So you got Samoshka up here and Sabrudno down here. This is all covered in forest as it is still today, and this area here is the Groshimosh or Kroshimok swamp. And even today you can see that the average forest vegetation cannot take hold here because it's too wet, and it would have been a nightmare to go through here even for infantry, especially if it's cold outside and snow. Now, this is where it gets interesting. We will look again at our big map here, or our close map I should say. And down here you can see a quite detailed layout of the Pustynja position, and the only connection that they had to their main front line, which you can see here, the only connection that they had is this road which led through the swamp here. And this road they called the Durststrecke, or thirst route, which sounds a bit sexy in today's parlance, but it was apparently a very exposed route, and you can see it kind of went along a little creek here, which is why we can still kind of see it on Google Earth today, even though the path itself, which was never really developed, is gone. But it would have been along here. You can see the outline of this creek here is the same on the map as well. So you would have the little village here, and the main front line would go through this forested area, as such as it were. And then you have the thirst route going here into this area, and this is where Pustynja used to be, or rather over here. And again, you can see these villages have been completely destroyed, but yeah, this is Pustynja at this point, where the first route ended, and where the Germans were dug in for basically a 360-degree defense. Now, there are several code names here, and if you zoom in you can see which company had which sector. For example, 10th Company of the 410th Regiment would have been in the northwestern corner here, looking up to the northwest. So yeah, this is of course kind of hard to make out because everything is gone. But yeah, it would have been in this area, and then the 10th Company, and looking up here into the swamp, basically. So yeah, quite interesting. Now, along the first route, there were several strong points in order to defend it, which makes a lot of sense. Now, if we look here at the beginning of the swamp, there was Hexenküche, which means witch's cauldron. So the witch's cauldron, if we look at it again, would have been basically here, where the swamp begins. Obviously we can't see anything of that, but there would have been trenches, probably earthworks, maybe some concrete bunkers, but considering how fluid the situation seems to have been at this time, it was probably not that massively developed. But yeah, so this would be the witch's cauldron. Then if we follow here towards Pustynja, there is height 80.8 here, which was held by the 7th Company, 409th Regiment, as well as 15th Company, 411th Regiment. So yeah, that's point 18.8, and then there's point 5.0 a bit further down the road, where there are two anti-tank guns here, and where the HQ actually was, which will come into play later if I remember correctly. So yeah, we can follow this. So probably point 80.8 was right about here, I would say, and point 5.0 maybe in this area here. It's kind of hard to tell because there's really not much to go by the terrain that is still here. But yeah, so basically big strong point here. This is the route to the actual front line, which would go along here. Swamps in between, swamps all around, and a kind of string of company strong points along this route trying to protect it. And actually where it goes back on dry land here, you can see that's where the front began, the actual German front. Yeah, and at the entrance of the village here in an eastern direction, there was the North Pole or Northern Pole position, which was another kind of strong point. So yeah, this was this forward position, and on the 21st it got attacked, and this is what we will look at now. We will look at the after action report. So, this is what an original German after-action report looks like. It was filed with a divisional HQ at the 2nd of December 1942, and it's about the fighting from the 21st to the 23rd of November of 1942. And first of all, it tells us the situation on the prior day, and it's about the forward position west of Saarbrücken, so the one we just looked at. Basically, these are the units involved. We have 2nd Battalion, Grenadier Regiment 409, 3rd Battalion, Grenadier Regiment 410, 15th Battalion, both of 410 and 411, parts of the 13th Battalion, Grenadier Regiment 409, parts of the Fast Battalion 122, so this is the scout troops, bicycle troops and so on, and 2 Panzer IIIs of the Panzer Regiment 203. These were Panzer IIIs that were attached from this Panzer Regiment to the infantry division, and they were armed with a 5 cm gun over there for tank support, obviously. And then these are the artillery batteries involved. So let's look at what actually happens. At the 21st of November at 4 a.m., a deserter is brought in at Pustynja, and he said that there would be an attack of parts of a new division after a strong firing strike or fire preparation. Now, this is actually something that happened quite often on the Eastern Front, that before a big attack, deserters would come over because they would not fancy their odds of survival, right? And at 6:15 in the morning, they see an infantry rally point, or an infantry forming up point southwest of Pustynja, and they shoot at it with artillery. Southwest of Pustynja, we can imagine, if we go here, southwest, so somewhere here, probably where this arrow is coming from. And then it actually goes all awry. At 7:05, a strong artillery fire lands at Pustynja, which is unceasing, and it increases all the time. So between 10:50 and 11, grenade launchers, so mortars, tanks, and heavy rocket artillery also join in, and it basically says that it reaches its highest intensity here, and after that the fire gets switched to the road from Saarbrücken to Pustynja. So this is basically the so-called thirst road. So the fire, first they completely nuke the strong point here, then the fire shifts over to the road. All along the road everything gets shelled and the fire here is lifted. At 10:40 a.m., an enemy attack from the south is recognized, and they call for Sperrfeuer, which means defensive fire, so pre-arranged defensive fire on a firing point in the south. After that, every communications connection to Pustynja is gone. So that's the last report they got. We were attacked from the south. We need artillery support, shoot at this or that coordinate. So 12 a.m. or midday, almost 1 hour and 20 minutes later, single completely traumatized soldiers from Pustynja show up at the battalion HQ of 3rd Battalion Grenadier Regiment 410 and tell them that Pustynja is under control of the Russians. They also say that the crew is basically completely destroyed by artillery fire except for some survivors, or they were buried alive, and their trenches, firing positions, weapons and munitions had been destroyed without anything being left. If we go back here for a second, you can see what apparently happened. There are several, you can't really see them because it's in black and white, but there are several arrows here showing that the Russians probably attacked from all directions at once to get into Pustynja after this massive artillery strike that completely destroyed the defensive positions here. So it was like a concentric attack after this artillery preparation. So at 12:30, the North Pole strong point is lost against T-34th infantry, and the biggest part of the crew, as well as all the weapons, are lost. and only 5 soldiers come back to the battalion HQ. And the battalion HQ, as I said earlier, the HQ is at point 5.0, and the first firing positions here are lost due to attacks by Russian tanks. So the Russian tanks started at 12:30 to shell this area and destroy bunkers. And one Russian T-34 drove over point 5.0 and reached until point 18.8, just to remember. So 80.8 was kind of in the middle here, 5.0 closer to Pustynja, probably somewhere in this area. So one T-34 broke through, drove until there, and there he was destroyed at 120 meters range by a 3.7 centimeter puck, which used the Stielgranate attachment. They used 2 of them until they hit it, and then it was destroyed. But the Germans also lost one of their own Panzer IIIs. It was also hit by a Russian T-34 and completely burned out. Now, for those of you who are not aware, we actually have this weapon in FH2. On my Operation Mars map, which plays in a similar area and basically the same time frame. So the 3.7 centimeter puck was completely outdated at this point, but they developed this shell for it, which you could put over the barrel, and which was a pretty big heat shell. Now, as you can imagine, it didn't have a lot of velocity, so you had to get pretty close to a tank, but if you hit it, it was probably going to get destroyed. And apparently they did manage to hit something at 120 meters. Now, I'm going to use this in here for a second. Right now we're in pushing mode here, but you can push it into position and then actually use it. And yeah, as you will see, the velocity is pretty low, so it's hard to aim. So normally in real life, now a crewman would come from behind the shield to put it on the barrel again, which is very dangerous for obvious reasons. This is not the case in FH2 though. But yeah, this is the weapon with which they managed to destroy at least one T-34 during this attack. The battalion HQ at strong point 5.0 could be held, but only half of it until the evening. The battalion leader, Oberleutnant Selle, was wounded. His adjutant was killed, and the ordnance officer was heavily wounded. Now, there were infantry attacks against the connection road at the western edge of the moor or the swamp, and these were apparently turned back. They estimate that the enemy artillery and mortars shot up to 4,000 shots, and that's without the rocket artillery. Now, in the night, they got wounded out of there, casualty evacuation, and they also got new supplies in there, including 2 new heavy puck, which were brought to point 80.8 and deployed there. At 5:50 in the morning, there's a counterattack by the 5th Company of the 409th Regiment. They counterattack from point 80.8 towards point 5.0 here, and they managed to reconquer or reoccupy the other half of that battalion HQ. And the T-34 that was defending it retreats. So the enemy infantry is thrown out or killed. So the Germans for a bit have this back under control. But then at 7 a.m. there's again strong enemy artillery and tank fire on this point, and most of the company is destroyed, including the company leader. So then it is here, because of the heavy casualties here, and because basically all the material at point 5.0 is destroyed. They lose that position at 9:30 a.m. And after that, the Russians go towards height 80.8 with infantry and tanks, but it's defended for now. Other strong points, the Wanka height and 80.8, are then encircled by the enemy. And the strong point Hexenkirche 2, or which is Cauldron 2, is taken by the enemy. So what this means is that on the second day, so the 22nd, if we look at the first route here, so this one has been overrun. Pustynja is in enemy hands, 5.0 is in enemy hands, 80.8 is defended but encircled, and Hexenkirche here is taken. Which basically means that, yeah, these guys are screwed. They're sitting now on this road at the edge of the swamp and are cut off from the main line. One thing to remember, though, is that they got delivered 2 heavy puck that would have been emplaced here at that point. And as you can see, this Russian attack here, that's probably the one that took the Witch's Cauldron here, coming from this direction, as also marked on the map. So, as you can imagine, it got a bit desperate at point 80.8. There were more than 1,150 artillery impacts on it at 12 a.m. Within 2 hours. The 2 heavy puck shoot 1 T-34, but 1 heavy puck is also hit in return and destroyed. So they are down to 1 puck here and are under artillery fire. They beat back several enemy attacks at 15:25, so at basically 3:30, and then between 5 and 6 p.m. And they managed to get supplies in there at night with the tanks basically as escorts. But yeah, as you can imagine, that was quite hard to accomplish considering the swampy terrain. So on the next day, on the 23rd of November, now here it gets a bit interesting because it says here Witch's Cauldron 2 is lost again at 7:30, which basically, it sounds to me like they did get back into that in the night to get a supply train through, or not a train, to get a supply convoy through, and then they lost it again at 7:30, but they don't really say that they ever really secured it, which to me makes it sound like there was quite a bit of chaos going on, especially at night. But yeah, again, after a strong artillery strike, they lose it, and they get it back again after a counterattack from point 80.8 this time. So much of the fighting here is now over this Witch's Cauldron, and because it's kind of their lifeline back to the actual German front line. Now, the AR goes on to say that at this point there are many instances of basically psychological trauma in this area, so that German soldiers are starting to lose their marbles a little bit, as can be expected. And part of this 80.8 position is the Sanka height, and this apparently at this point gets overrun by enemy tanks, which makes this position basically untenable. So basically, in the language of the time, they say that the resilience of the troops' souls is no longer able to resist the strong burden of this concentrated fire, and that single soldiers have temper tantrums and fits and so on. And yeah, the Sanka height is lost to enemy tanks. So then the final attack comes at 10:30, and the rest of the crew of point 80.8 can no longer hold, and they retreat together with one single Panzer III to the eastern edge of the swamp. And the enemy infantry and tanks that follow them are engaged by their own artillery at the western edge of the swamp, and one Russian tank apparently is hit and destroyed here. And there's still the 7th Company of Regiment 409, is still in the north of point 18.8, completely cut off, and they hold out until the dawn of, well, not the dawn of darkness, until sunset, and they manage to get back while taking all the wounded with them. And it says here in closing that the overall casualties were 385 people here. There's also a detailed breakdown here of the material that they lost. So, for example, they lost 228 K98Ks and so many bayonets. And then you can see here pistols, MP, light machine gun 34, heavy machine gun 34, 5cm grenade launchers, heavy 8cm mortars, 7 sniper rifles, 25 rifle grenade launchers, 5 3.7cm puck, 2 7.5cm puck. These, I think, were the French ones, the 97/38, and 1 Russian 7.62cm puck. So these were the heavy puck that was sent there to reinforce the position. And also 3 light infantry guns. And there's also here radio equipment, stuff like that. And it also says here stuff like how many different types of shovels and other fortification equipment, axes, and so on. So there's quite a bit of detail here in this report. And here there's also a report on how many people were lost in each of these different units that were involved. Now, the end result of this battle was that this complete forward position here was basically gone, so this was wiped out by the Russians. The new front line would be along the edge of the swamp here. This is actually put into the map here as well to a degree. So this would be the new Russian front line, and this the new German front line, and this was wiped out. Now, the Germans took some lessons from this battle, which are also quite interesting to read into. Now, in terms of experiences, what they say is that a forward outpost like this will always be an invitation to the enemy to attack, especially if it's connected only by a very small threat to the main front. And it says here that survivors said that the forces in this forward outpost felt superior to the Russians because they had already beaten back some attacks, so even when the deserter came in and warned them of the attack, they were not that concerned about it. And they say that the strongpoint could not be held because of the massive superiority of enemy artillery, which could not be attacked by the own artillery. And this seems to be the main reason why this fell, and it makes a lot of sense. If you look at the big map, if you think about it, the artillery is way behind the line. Here is the artillery battery. Here's another one. And these have a somewhat limited range. You have to cover all this area, and they simply cannot, like if the enemy artillery is way here, they cannot be reached, but at the same time they can shoot at this strong point from all directions without having to fear German counter battery fire because they're simply out of range. So basically this outpost was not under the umbrella of German artillery fire, which made it basically impossible to hold at the end of the day. So the Russians could mess up all the artillery they want and basically smother it in heavy fire. It also says here that all the fortifications could be looked at by the enemy from their positions. So he could completely pre-plan the artillery fire to knock out one firing position after the other in detail by a pre-planned barrage. Now, what's interesting here is that in 1942, many Russian offensives, especially those in the Rzhev sector, often failed because they did not have the ability yet to mass this kind of artillery. Later in the war, the Germans actually had to change their defensive procedures. For example, in the Silo Heights battle, they famously left the main battle line right before the enemy attacked because they knew that otherwise they would be wiped out by artillery. This is in my opinion, one of the first kind of situations where this actually happened on the Eastern Front, where they were in such a position that the Russians could mass this kind of artillery and just blow up their complete defensive position. It also says here that the connection to the back to the actual front line was very narrow, and that due to the forest, the enemy could very easily sneak up to this road, and this makes immediate sense. If you look at the terrain today, oops, I have this on the wrong monitor, 1 second. This makes immediate sense. Like, the route ran through this forested area here and was only guarded by single strong points, like point 50, point 5, which was in this area here. So you can imagine that the Russians could get very close to this one single road, maybe even put up roadblocks during the battle. So yeah, this is a very vulnerable position indeed. And it also says here that it's very hard to use this road, especially over the dam through the swamp, which was completely devoid of cover. It also says here that the only way they could have held it is if it was part of the main battle line, and apparently this was planned to do, like they were doing their own preparations for an attack, but the Russians attacked first before they could actually push forward their front line. It also talks about the enemy tanks here. First of all, it says that there were not enough anti-tank weapons inside Pustynja, and that the light puck was mostly destroyed by the enemy artillery fire, even before tanks came. What's also interesting is that they apparently had minefields, but survivors say that these did not work. And they say this is possibly because the minefields had been hit by artillery and made unusable. Might also be that the Russians cleared lanes in the night. I imagine that in a forest area, it could be fairly easy to sneak into a minefield at night and clear lanes before, or mark them or something. Now, that's just my own theory. That's not in the document. It also complains about the own light tanks, that they are not up to the task. And it says here one German tank, without success, shot at a T-34 several times and then was destroyed or set on fire by the T-34. And it also says that Haftladungen, so magnetic mines, have not been used because they were also destroyed by the artillery fire. So what they learn from that is that you can't really rely on the minefields, and that you need to have mines on hand to use spontaneously. It also says that assault guns and Panzer IV have to be kept in reserve in order to fight enemy tanks. So basically the Panzer III is not useful with a 5 centimeter gun. About the fortification, it says here that due to the water, as I said, swampy area, they couldn't dig deeper than 1.5 meters, 50 centimeters. And so the fortifications apparently were not that strong, and as I said earlier, the enemy could see where they were and target them very precisely with artillery. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this little video about a battle that I'm pretty sure nobody has ever made a video about. I don't think I've ever heard about this. In the big scheme of the war, of course, it was a skirmish at the end of the day. The Germans didn't lose massive forces or anything, but I think it actually showed what would happen much later in the war with some regularity, and I thought it was quite interesting. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.